Hey y'all, it is finally my favorite time of the year, and that is fall time. I love everything about it, but I especially love cooking all the cozy meals in the cooler months. It just brings me so much happiness. So I decided to pick 6 of my top favorite fall dinners that immediately came to mind and just put it all into one video so it can always just be in one place, easier to get to. So I really enjoyed making this video, and I just really hope that you guys enjoy it too. I hope that it's helpful for you guys. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into the first recipe. First up, I am making my vegetable soup. This is my recipe, and we absolutely love it, especially my kids. It's something that we always really look forward to having. So I know I said vegetable soup, that's what we call it around here, but yes, it does have ground beef in it. So I do start by browning up 1 pound of ground chuck in a big old soup pot, and about halfway through the cook time, after I've gotten my meat all broken apart, I season the meat with some salt, pepper, and onion powder, and then I just continue cooking it until there's no longer any pink, and then I drain off the grease, and I mince up a few fresh cloves of garlic, or sometimes I use the jarred garlic, that's fine too. Add that in, cook it with the beef for a couple of minutes until it smells nice and fragrant. And then I'm going to add in some fresh carrots and potatoes. This is about 2 medium carrots that I peeled and diced, and 2 medium russet potatoes that I peeled and diced and washed, of course. I'm also adding in about a half a head of cabbage that I chopped. Now, this V8 tomato juice, to me, is what I feel makes this soup so good. This is 64 ounces, and I am going to be adding in the whole container. Of course, any tomato juice will work just fine in here and be really good as well. I just really love the V8, so that is what I stick with. So I'm going to make sure everything fits down in the tomato juice, kind of getting everything smushed down in there. And now I'm going to season the soup since I added in all of those unseasoned vegetables. So I'm going to go in with some salt and black pepper and a healthy amount of onion and garlic powder. At this point, I'm going to give it another really good stir just to make sure that the seasonings are really distributed throughout the whole pot. And I'm going to let that come up to a boil. And then I'm going to add my lid and turn that heat down a little bit. And I'm going to let that cook for about 30 to 40 minutes to let everything get really nice and tender. I am going to be adding in a can of peas, a can of corn, and a can of green beans. I know some people prefer frozen vegetables, and that is completely fine. You can do that instead. We just really prefer the canned vegetables, to be honest. So I'm going to get all of those drained off, and then I added those in there after that 30 to 40 minute cook time. I'm going to, again, give that a good stir, get those all distributed throughout, and then I'm going to let this come back up to a boil, and I'm going to let this continue cooking for about 30 minutes because we really like our vegetables, especially the cabbage, to be super tender. And this time, for the final cook time, I'm going to leave that lid off. That way it can be more of a stew-like consistency. If you like yours to be juicier, put that lid on. It will help the liquid from evaporating quicker. So this is what it looks like when it is completely finished. As you can see, there is vegetables in every bite. It is really fully loaded, and it is just so good. It has the best taste to it, and it's just one of my absolute favorite dinners of all time. So I'm going to show y'all how we serve it up since everyone does it a little different. So I'm just giving myself a few ladles of it. I'm spooning in some extra tomato juice, and we really love to have shredded cheese on top of ours. It gets really nice and melty. We like to serve it alongside with a grilled cheese or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We was feeling the grilled cheese this night, and we love saltine crackers with it. We crush it up and just mix it in with the soup. This makes enough to feed a large crowd, so keep that in mind. I almost always have leftovers to freeze, and I can just thaw it out when I want it and heat it up, and it's just always so good either way. So I do have this recipe written out in my notes in my phone, so I will copy and paste that into my description box in case anyone is interested in this recipe. If you do, give it a try. I really hope that you love it as much as we do. Next up, I'm going to be making some open-faced roast beef sandwiches. I always use a chuck roast for this. This is close to 3 pounds, and as you can see, I got it for a little under $15. Chuck roast tends to be expensive, so I always wait for it to go on sale to buy one, so that was a pretty good price for that. So I'm just adding it to the bottom of my crock pot, and I'm going to grab a packet of pot roast seasoning mix, and I'm just going to add that to a measuring cup that has the amount of water that it's stated on the back of that package. And I'm just taking my whisk and whisking it together really good, making sure there's no big clumps or anything. And I'm just going to simply pour that over my roast. And that is it for the meat. I have been making it this way for years and years. It is one of the most easiest dinners that I make, and it is one of my husband's absolute favorites. So I'm going to let that cook on low for 8 hours. So here we are after it has cooked all day long, and here I'm trying to skim off some of that fat. This is something that's my only complaint with a pot roast, is how greasy it can be, especially the next day. So I'm just taking a ladle and I'm trying to get as much as I can without like taking too much of the seasoning and all that. So if there's a better way of doing that, please let me know. I did see on Amazon where you can buy like a fat separator. I'm debating on buying it, so if anyone has one of those, let me know if they actually work, because that would be awesome. So here, as you can see, I just went in with 2 forks to shred up the meat. It fell apart so effortlessly. It's always super tender, which is why we love it so much. It's super flavorful and it's just perfect. So you can do so many things with it. But like I said, we're doing an open-faced roast beef sandwich. So here's how we do it. We put down a piece of white bread, and we love to have the Bob Evans microwaved mashed potatoes with this particular meal. It's just how we like to do it. And I just kind of smear that over top of the bread, and then I add a good amount of that shredded tender roast beef. And I like to make some brown gravy on the side, just a packet mix that you mix with water and heat on the stove. And I spoon that all over top of the roast beef, and that's it. We almost always serve it with some green beans on the side, and it's just super delicious. And like I said, and as you've seen, extremely simple. So I want to know what y'all call this sandwich, because I know there's different names for it depending on where you live. So I'm just curious. Next up, I'm going to be making some homemade rolls and some loaded cheesy potato soup. So here I'm getting the rolls started. So I'm adding 1.5 cups of some warm water to my stand mixer, 3 tablespoons of some sugar, and 1 tablespoon of some active dry yeast. So I'm going to give that a real quick stir, and then I'm just going to leave that alone for about 5 minutes. You know your yeast is activated when it's nice and bubbly on top. So at that point, I added in 4 tablespoons of some room temperature butter and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Now I'm going to be adding in 3 cups of just some plain all-purpose flour. I have my dough hook attachment on, and I'm going to start by slowly mixing it. That way the flour doesn't go flying everywhere. And then once it starts getting incorporated, I can turn it up a little bit. And as soon as it gets combined, you can start judging how much more flour you will need. So I measure out another cup of flour, and I just start adding in a little bit at a time, because you probably won't need the full cup. It just kind of depends on a few different factors. You'll know by looking at it, but I ended up using 3.5 cups of flour total for these rolls. So once it pulls away from the side and it's not too sticky to the touch, I will leave it alone at this point and just let it knead for about 3 minutes. And then I'm done with the mixer. I'm going to cover it with a towel and leave it alone for about 30 minutes to rise. So at that point, I want to get started on the potato soup. So in this bowl, I have about 3 pounds of potatoes. You only see 4 here because these are on the large side. My dad gave us a big old box of potatoes that are homegrown. He went and picked them himself from a garden, so we have been using those for quite a while, and they've been delicious. I know the last time I made this, I used red skin potatoes, and I left the skin on, and I thought that was so delicious, but my kids prefer it without the peel, so that's the route I'm taking this time. So after I got those peeled, I washed them really well, and now I'm going to get them diced up. So How small or how big you dice them is just a personal preference thing, but I do feel like most people would probably prefer it on the smaller side, so that's the route I'm taking. Now, typically when I make potato soup, I like to start by frying my bacon in the same pot I'm going to cook the soup in, and I leave a little bit of the grease in it, but I already had some bacon cooked up from a different recipe, so I didn't need to, so I just added a little bit of bacon grease, melted it down, threw in all of those potatoes, and then I added in 3 cups of chicken broth and 6 cups of just some regular 2% milk. So that's the liquid I'm going to be cooking my potatoes in. So now I'm just adding in some Lawry seasoned salt and some onion and garlic powder. If you like actual onions, you could leave out the onion powder and just use those instead. So while I'm waiting for that to come up to a boil, I'm going to come back to my rolls. So as you can see, it has doubled. So I just punched it down. I'm getting it pulled away from the sides of the bowl. I do have a 9x13 greased casserole dish sitting next to me. And I'm going to simply just pinch some of the dough mixture off and form it into a messy little ball, and I'm just going to fill up that pan and until all of my dough is gone. So I'm sure there is a better way to make sure that these are all like uniform in size, but I just wasn't having it this night. I didn't care if they weren't all perfectly the same. So I'm going to cover it up again with that same towel and place it on the stove while my oven preheats. So fast forward a little bit, my oven's preheated to 350. I'm going to go ahead and get those rolls popped in for about 20 minutes. I do want those potatoes cooking for about 10 to 15 minutes. So meanwhile, I shredded up a block of sharp cheddar cheese, and I'm moving on to the next step, which is to melt down a whole stick of butter. I did use salted, but you can use, unsalted if you want to. I added in a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour to my melted butter, and I'm just taking my whisk and mixing it together really good and letting that flour cook out for a few minutes. So basically, I'm making a roux here, and once I got it to that point, I'm going to start ladling in a few ladles of that cooking liquid that I cooked the potatoes in into the butter and flour mixture, and I'm just continuing to stir. I did about 4 to 5 ladles, and just kept on stirring. This is what's going to thicken up the potato soup. So if you are against like cream soups in a can, which I'm not, but if you are, this is a good potato soup recipe for you. So I just simply dumped that into the pot of soup. This was after my potatoes were perfectly tender. And as soon as you start mixing that in, it's going to dissolve perfectly, and you should start to see your soup like instantly start to thicken up. So now I'm going to start seasoning it again with some more salt and pepper. Potato soup is one of those things that you need to kind of come in periodically and give it a little taste to make sure it's seasoned to your taste. For the last couple of steps, I'm adding in about a 1/2 cup, I would say, of some heavy whipping cream. And I'm also going to add in all of that cheese that I hand shredded myself. Again, sharp cheddar, so it's about 2 cups, and that will melt down pretty quickly. And once it does, you can turn off the stove and your soup is ready. This is so delicious, has such a great flavor and texture to it. Everything about it is just perfect, and it's just one of those things that my family really, really loves. So here's those rolls as soon as they come out of the oven. As you can see, they're kind of golden brown on top. I do run a little bit of butter over the top to melt over it, and my kids always go crazy for these rolls. They will eat so many of them. I need to start making them more often. Always a hit, and they go so perfectly with this potato soup. With our potato soup, we always like to top it with some extra pepper, a little extra shredded cheese, some crispy crumbled bacon, and I like to add dry chives on mine. I know a lot of people like to add green onions over theirs, but to me, this is just the perfect fall dinner. It's another one of those that is just one of my all-time favorites. I am a big soup person, and this is just really up there on my list. Next, I had to include my favorite recipe for meatloaf. So to a large mixing bowl, I've added in 2 pounds of some ground beef. I'm going to be adding in 1 sleeve of Ritz crackers that I have just quickly crushed up. Doesn't have to be perfect. Also 1 beaten egg and 1 cup of milk. Again, I'm using 2%, but use whatever milk you buy. You'll also need about a 1/2 cup of some ketchup, and then you'll just season it to your liking. I'm just doing some onion and garlic powder, salt, and pepper, and that's it. Very simple ingredients. I pretty much always have those ingredients on hand, so I can whip this up at any given time, which I love. So I'm just getting in there with my hands and giving it a quick mix until it is just combined, and then I'm going to transfer that on over to a greased loaf pan, and again with my hands, I'm just going to kind of smooth out the top. Now, you have to make sure that you put a cookie sheet under this. especially if you're using a loaf pan, because there's a good chance the oil can like bubble over. So that's going to go in the oven at 350 for an hour and a half. And as soon as I pop that in, I'm going to get started on a hash brown casserole. It goes good with everything, but especially a meatloaf. So in this large mixing bowl, I just added in 1 bag of frozen shredded hash browns. I did a quick thaw on those in the sink with some water, and the water seeped into the bag. So that's why I had to strain them first, and then I kind of had to take a towel and dry them. But once I got all that done, I'm just seasoning my potatoes with Lawry's seasoned salt, onion powder, and pepper. Now to that, I'm going to be adding in 1 cup of sour cream and a whole can of cream of chicken soup. You'll also need about 2 cups total of some shredded sharp cheddar cheese. I decided to do a cup in the mixture and then a cup on top. I don't always do that. It's just whatever I'm feeling that day. I also melted down about a half a stick of butter, and I'm just folding all of that together. Now, most recipes do call for a whole stick of butter, and I've done that in the past, and sometimes it comes out a bit too greasy for me, so that's why I cut it down. But you know, it's still good that way, so just do your own thing there. But I got that dumped out into a greased 9x13 casserole dish, got that spread out smooth, and then, like I said, I'm doing a final cup of cheese over the top, and that goes in the oven at 350 as well for about 45 minutes, so I can just put that alongside the meatloaf. So once I got that in, I'm going to start working on the meatloaf glaze, which to me is what makes a good meatloaf. So this one is really good. It's about 3/4 cup of ketchup, a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. This recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of apricot preserves. I didn't have any, so I substituted it with grape jelly for the first time. I also did about a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. Now, if you use that grape jelly, it's like impossible to get it completely like clump free, but we don't really care about that. And I knew it would work really well with this. If you've ever made like party meatballs, it calls for grape jelly, so wasn't worried at all. So I took the meatloaf out about halfway through the cooking time, and I like to take a paper towel and kind of get a lot of that grease off the top. I use an 85% lean ground beef, but with 2 pounds of meat, it's still going to put out quite a bit. So I just put some of that glaze on the top and let it finish cooking. And here is what that hash brown casserole looks like as soon as it comes out of the oven. It is just perfect. And then here is the meatloaf. When it is done, some of that grease definitely leaked out, so thank goodness for that cookie sheet. If you want it to cut into perfect slices, you need to let it sit and rest for at least 15 minutes. This was a late night dinner. My daughter had her first ball game on this night, so again, late dinner, I didn't have time to let it rest. So there's the meatloaf. The hash brown casserole turned out really great as always. I served it with those leftover rolls that I made with the potato soup. And we did a can of peas, which I actually managed to kind of overcook. You can probably tell by looking at them, but they still tasted delicious. And I don't cook meatloaf that often because my dad makes it pretty often when we come over to visit, because it's like one of the best things that he makes. He makes a really good meatloaf. So it has been a while, and we really enjoy this dinner. Next, I'm going to be making a shepherd's pie. We absolutely love this recipe for it. So I always start off by boiling the potatoes for the mashed potatoes. So this is 5 pounds of potatoes. I don't believe I've ever made that many, but I'm just getting that boiled in some salted water until they're nice and tender. And meanwhile, I'm going to get started on the beef mixture. So I'm melting down 2 tablespoons of butter, and I'm adding about 4 carrots that I have peeled, washed, and diced. And the recipe does say to add some diced onion and saute that with the carrots. I just seasoned the carrots with some onion powder and called it a day, but I'm going to saute those for about 8 minutes, and then I'm going to add in 1.5 pounds of ground beef. So just going to get that beef cooked in with the carrots. I'm getting it all chopped up, and per usual, when it's about halfway done, I'm going to go in with my seasonings, and I just stuck with some garlic salt and some black pepper, and then I'm just going to continue cooking all of that together until the meat is fully cooked through and browned, and then you'll need to drain the grease. So I'm going back in with another paper towel. Typically with this, I would do it over like a strainer over top of a bowl, but since I had the carrots in there, I didn't want to get those all smushed up or anything, so I just kept doing that until I saw no more grease. So next, I'm going to be adding in 1.5 cups of some frozen peas. Going to get that mixed in good, and then you'll need 1.5 cups of beef broth. I'm just using water and beef bouillon powder, and you'll also need a tablespoon of cornstarch, and you'll just want to whisk all of that together really good, and then you're going to pour that on into your beef mixture. You'll also need a good amount of Worcestershire sauce. I finished off my bottle. Definitely have to restock that, but at this point, I'm going to turn my heat up a bit to about a medium-high heat. You want that to start bubbling, and that will start to thicken it because of the cornstarch, and you'll just cook it for a few minutes, just until it's thickened like a gravy and coating everything. So while that's going on, I'm going to finish up the mashed potatoes. So I drain those, added those to a big bowl with a stick of butter, about a half a cup of sour cream, and then I just add in some heavy whipping cream. For the seasonings, I'm doing some Lawry seasoned salt, regular salt, black pepper, and some garlic powder. Typically when I make mashed potatoes, I just stick to salt and pepper, but since this is for a shepherd's pie, I do like them extra seasoned. So I'm just going in with my hand mixer to get those extra smooth and creamy. Those tasted delicious, and those are done. So now to finish off the beef mixture, you'll definitely want to go in and give it a little taste test to see if it needs extra salt and pepper. Mine did, so I went ahead and threw that on in there, and then I'm just going to dump that out into my 9x13 casserole dish. I do have my oven preheated to 350 degrees, and now I am just dumping out those mashed potatoes. I did use a good amount of those, like most of them, but there was still a bit left over, which is completely fine. I just stored them in the fridge. Love some good leftover mashed potatoes. So just taking a spatula, spreading it on there like a icing on cake. And then lastly, I'm just going to hit it with some cheese that I shredded up. Again, some sharp cheddar. I added maybe a cup, and that's going to go in the oven for 30 minutes. And then I flipped on the broiler at the end for a couple of minutes just to make the cheese look really nice on top. And I think that that just looks so perfect. You know it's done when it's like bubbling around the edges, and of course when the cheese is melted. But this is definitely one of those meals that I think is especially perfect for fall time, and it's definitely gonna look like it's mostly mashed potatoes, but you can see the nice like meat and vegetables in the bottom. And this is another thing that you should let set so that it can, you know, serve up nicer, but it just seems like I'm always in a hurry, so I pretty much just served it up immediately. So it might not be the most eye-pleasing looking thing to look at, but it tasted so delicious. This is such a great recipe for shepherd's pie, and I know that shepherd's pie is typically made with lamb. I don't even know if they sell that where I live. I've never had that, but this is what we call a shepherd's pie. Last but certainly not least, I'm going to make a really quick version of white chicken chili, and I love using a rotisserie chicken for this. I love the lemon peppered ones from Walmart, so I typically shred those earlier in the day, and then I can just pull it out of the fridge when it's time for dinner and whip this up so quick. So I've melted down 2 tablespoons of butter. I've added in 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, and I'm just whisking that together real good, letting that flour cook out for a couple of minutes. And this particular pot likes to brown my butter really insanely quick, so I quickly added in my chicken broth. I added in 3 cups, quickly stirred that in, and you'll also need a cup of half and half. So I'm going to get that mixed together good, and I'm just going to let that simmer for a few minutes before I add anything to it so that it can start to slightly thicken. Once it reaches that point, I'm going to go ahead and add in that shredded rotisserie chicken. I also went in with some scissors to make it like extra chopped. I just like that consistency a little bit better in this. I'm also going to be adding in 2 cans of some Great Northern beans that I drained and rinsed, a can of corn that I drained, and then 2 cans of some green chilies. Don't drain those. I know before when I made this, I would just do 1 can of green chilies, but I've come to realize that we really like those. We get the mild version, so they're not spicy at all, and they add so much flavor. So I do 2 cans. And now I'm just going to add in the seasoning. So you're going to need some salt and some black pepper to your taste, a good amount of garlic powder and onion powder. You're also going to need 2 teaspoons of cumin and a teaspoon of chili powder. I know they also make white chicken chili seasoning packets. I know McCormick makes one for sure. I used to buy it. You could use that in place of adding in all those seasonings if you want to. It'll still turn out great. Next, I'm going to shred up this whole block of some pepper jack cheese and add that straight on into the pot. And it's going to melt beautifully. I've never had any issues doing it this way. And that's all the ingredients. You're going to let it simmer for about 20 minutes, and that is it. It comes together so quick and it is just perfect every single time. I have not met one single person that I have served this to that didn't like it, and they always ask me for the recipe. So it's insanely quick, insanely delicious. I typically just serve it with cheese and crackers like I would a regular chili, but this time I also added in some sour cream, some sliced avocado that was seasoned with garlic salt, and I did crushed tortilla chips instead of crackers, and it was so good served this way. I would definitely do that again, but if you are on the search for a quick white chicken chili, I promise you this recipe is the one. But that is all I got for y'all in today's video. I hope that it was helpful. I would love it if at least one of these recipes made it onto your meal plan this fall. And I want y'all to let me know down in the comments, what is your favorite dish to make in the fall time? I would love to hear it. As always, I want to thank y'all so much for watching. Thank y'all so much for the support. I hope each and every one of you have an amazing rest of your week, and I'll see y'all in the next one.